let's see what the news has in store for us today. So, the past 7 days of news. UK protest crackdowns. Several independent outlets, Novara Media and Open Democracy, reported on increased police use of public order powers at climate and pro-Palestine demonstrations. Themes included expanded use of Section 14 orders, preemptive arrests, and concerns from civil liberties groups about mission creep. If you haven't seen it already, I've done a video on protests. It was a Research Hub video, so that went out probably about a month and a half ago, on our powers of protest being curtailed by the new policing bill that's been put through, Police and Criminal Acts bill that's been put through Parliament. And at the time, it was sitting in the House of Lords. So I may well have to check on that to see whether it's passed the House of Lords and whether they're working within those parameters. But if you remember, there were police powers that effectively said that if they thought, the preemptive side of this, if they thought that there could be trouble, then they could shut the protest down before it even started. So they would refuse the request to protest, and if there was trouble, then they would arrest on the spot, and that would be preemptive arrests. The biggest thing that we keep seeing is people being arrested for wearing t-shirts or holding banners. So not necessarily aggressive. A lot of the protests have been really non-aggressive. They've been silent almost, where people have been sitting down in the streets and protesting silently, and they've still been arrested. And it's under the guise of the pro-Palestine Action Group, which was under proscription, and that was lifted by the courts. However, the policing powers, the public order powers, are now such that it doesn't seem to matter that the proscription has been lifted from Palestine action groups. So that's very concerning. And if you think about our right to protest in the UK, it's the only way that we have of telling our government that we're unhappy, and they're taking that away from us. So yet another step towards the dictatorship that has become Britain. Point 2, local council bankruptcy risks. We had this last week. Non-mainstream economic reporters highlighted 3 more councils warning of potential Section 114 notices due to social care overspend, commercial property debt, and central government funding gaps. This continues the pattern seen in Birmingham, Nottingham, and Croydon. Well, there were problems when we spoke, I'm sure it was last week or maybe the week before, with the councils and the bankruptcy risks. And I suggested it might be some form of misappropriation of the fund. It looks like it's not just those 3. It's now been found out to be more of the councils in our country. So commercial property debt, I would suggest that that's taxes that are, when you have a property, a commercial property, you have to pay tax on that property. And it may well be that the taxes are so high that it's impossible to cover for the businesses. So that could be a problem. Social care overspend. Social care, there's the waiting lists for social care are extortionately long. So where the overspend is there, I'm unsure. And central government funding caps. Well, we know that our central government doesn't fund the justice system correctly, doesn't fund our National Health Service system correctly or adequately. So that is not surprising at all. Water pollution and river safety. Environmental Independence, the Ferret and Byline Times covered new data showing record sewage discharges in several English rivers. We mentioned this a few weeks ago as well about the contaminated water. Citizen science groups challenging water company reporting accuracy, and legal threats against Ofwat for regulatory failure. Well, water pollution and river safety is abysmal in our country at the moment, and it's very disturbing because it will ultimately affect our wildlife and the general ecosystem. So, yeah, very concerning. Housing crisis and evictions. Grassroots housing organisations reported a sharp rise in Section 21 eviction notices, landlords accelerating evictions ahead of expected legislative changes, and rent increases in major cities outpacing wage growth. Now, I know that private landlords have now come under a new, I think it's a new regulation under the law for being a private landlord. And I have a feeling that that is causing the tenants to have to pay more rent for a start, but the rents are increasing. The rents in our area in Gateshead have increased, and the wage growth does not reflect in the rent increase. So we are not earning anymore. However, the cost of our housing is increasing. So that's something that's, again, quite concerning. Point 5, National Health Service staffing and pay disputes. Independent health reporters highlighted ongoing shortages in emergency medicine and midwifery. Junior doctor pay negotiations stalling again, and trusts relying on overseas recruitment to fill critical gaps. Ongoing shortages in emergency medicine and midwifery. I covered on a research hub the problems with our National Health Service midwifery guidelines. So there is a research hub on that. It's worth dishing that out and having a look. In emergency medicine, I wasn't aware of shortages in emergency medicine. I know that we have general shortages in the National Health Service, full stop. The junior doctor pay negotiations. Again, our government does not fund our National Health Service to the point of paying the doctors what they're worth. And all the banging of pots and pans over the COVID period wasn't really very helpful, and it would have been nice to see our government do something to recognise the efforts that were made by the National Health Service during what was probably an orchestrated crisis, but a crisis nonetheless. And trusts relying on overseas recruitment to fill critical gaps. Again, that doesn't surprise me, and it's more fodder for people complaining about people coming into our country. Okay, point 6, digital rights and surveillance. On our Wednesday research hub, we've been covering my version of a digital bill of rights that is desperately needed in this country, as the dictatorship that is our government is enforcing things upon us like digital surveillance, digital ID. Primary focused outlets, Open Rights Group, Double Down News, covered expansion of facial recognition trials in London, concerns about data sharing between police and private retailers, and criticism of the Online Safety Act's encryption scanning provisions. So expansion of facial recognition trials, we know that. I've brought that to you quite a few times, and it says in London, but we also know that it's being rolled out in many different councils and many different cities and towns across the country. They are letting us know that they're doing it by putting up banners that say you are in a facial recognition area, or we are conducting facial recognition technology today. However, you are not able to cover your face. If that's the case, it's a case of, if it's happening in your area, stay indoors if you don't want to be captured on their facial recognition technology. Concerns about data sharing between police and private retailers. This wouldn't surprise me at all, because there is no protections in place for the data that they utilize when they collect it and who they can give it to. Again, that is covered in my digital bill of rights. They would be unable to share any data with any other private retailers, private companies, anyone, without your explicit permission. That is set out in the digital bill of rights that I cover on Wednesdays. Criticism of the Online Safety Act's encryption scanning provisions. I'm not sure. I haven't seen any queries about this on social media, but I will admit to have kind of staying off of social media a little bit over the week and only diving in occasionally, because I'm safeguarding my mental health. And the more time that I spend online researching and looking at social media platforms, the more distraught it makes me, and the propaganda that is being fed and the slop that we are being given over social media as the algorithms want you to look at specific things that I am not really interested in. I don't want to see pro-foreign country propaganda. I don't want to see pro-government propaganda. And that's what I'm being fed across all of my social media at the moment. So I dip in, but I don't stay in for a long period of time, because it's like wading through mud. Okay, and that's it for Copilot this week. Nothing that I would suggest I would look into more deeply from a health and wellbeing point of view at all. So we'll now go to our Claude, and we'll ask Claude the same question. So here is a roundup of the top UK news stories for the past 7 days, according to Claude. 1st of May, 7 local and devolved elections, reform surge, Labour bloodbath. So Claude has taken us back to the 7th of May, not the 1st of May, it's point 1, the 7th of May. So he's taken us back to the 7th of May for some reason. So the May 7th elections across England, Scotland and Wales produced what analysts are calling seismic results. The elections held across the UK on the 7th of May 2026 produced a series of dramatic outcomes, and the political ramifications are still playing out. Maybe that's why he's brought it to us again this week. Reform UK made massive gains in English councils. The Electoral Reform Society noted that Scotland produced an election result that actually reflects how people voted, a pointed contrast to England's first past the post system. Novara Media has been charting the fallout, including the Makerfield by-election, and whether Andy Burnham, recently barred from standing by his own party, now heralded as the man to keep reform at bay, is destined for Westminster. Well, I would argue that Andy Burnham isn't destined for Westminster. Even though I've been bombarded by government propaganda over the last week, specifically on X, I will tell you that Andy Burnham is not coming out on top when it comes to general opinion. He's a staunch Zionist, and that is going very much against him, because people are really very unhappy about the pro-Israel influence in our government. And people are very unhappy as well that even though thousands upon thousands of people signed a petition to look into pro-Israel lobbying of our politicians, the politicians have refused to look into it. So I have seen a lot of posts from people that say they are not willing to support a politician, or as we fondly call them, puppetician, who is influenced by Zionists. And I think that people are going to find it really difficult to find any politicians that aren't influenced by the Zionist lobby. So The pro-Israel people are like a plague that have gone right the way through our elected officials, unfortunately, and they don't want us, the public, to know how deep that rot goes. That's why they're not doing any form of inquiry, even though we signed a petition to ask them to do it. I think one of the most interesting things about the elections is the amount of people who didn't vote, not the amount of people who did. And I think it's very telling when around 50% of the population are so disillusioned with the governance that we have in our country that they just don't bother to vote. And there's a quote that says, if voting made a difference, they'd make it illegal. And I agree. Voting doesn't make a difference. It doesn't matter who you vote in, you're going to get the global cabal, and they are going to control whoever sits in the Prime Minister's seat in this country, unfortunately. However, if it came to the point of disbanding our government, we could start again, and we could actually look at the 50% who don't vote, question why they don't vote, and ask them what they would like in place of our government. And I've got quite a few ideas. Point 2. King's speech sets new government agenda. A state opening of Parliament took place on the 13th of May 2026. So that was last Wednesday. It happened. And I said to you then that we'd got the news on the day, because it happened on the day we were doing the news. When the monarch opened the second session of the Parliament elected at the 2024 general election. The timing, days after the local election results, was widely seen as a political manoeuvre to steady Starmer's leadership and signal a fresh legislative chapter. Well, I can tell you it hasn't steadied Starmer's leadership. There are still mass calls, regardless of the propaganda they're trying to slap in our faces at the moment. There are mass calls still for Starmer to resign whenever Starmer puts a post up. The likes are very few and the comments are very, very many, and the comments are never good. Point 3, Epstein files. UK police open multiple investigations. One of the biggest breaking stories of this week. Surrey police is investigating 2 separate allegations of non-recent child sexual abuse linked to information that appeared in the US Justice Department's files related to the late convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. One report relates to locations in Surrey and Berkshire in the mid-1990s and 2000. The other relates to the mid to late 1980s in West Surrey. No arrests have been made. The Mandelson angle has been explosive. British police are investigating the Labour peer on suspicion of misconduct in public office, while Thames Valley Police is leading a separate probe into Andrew Mountbatten Windsor for the same alleged offence. Both men were arrested and bailed after the US Department of Justice released 3 million documents relating to the late billionaire. The Met Commissioner is pressing the US authorities to share unredacted versions of the Epstein files, with the process potentially taking up to a year under formal legal channels. Well, we know that the Trump government decided to release half of the Epstein files. So they released 3 million documents, and there are evidently 3 million more that haven't been released. I think one of the things to bear in mind when it comes to looking at this kind of thing is that it's going to take a long while. I mean, they've said the process potentially taking up to a year. I would suggest that just getting the files might take up to a year, and then it will take a lot longer to process, go through, and actually work out where the legalities of pulling charges out of those files would come from and who they would be aimed at. So I think that this is quite a long, protracted process that is going to take a very long time to get to the bottom of it, but we'll keep an eye on it. Point 4, Tommy Robinson. I'm going to correct Claude and put pro-Israeli Tommy Robinson's Unite the Kingdom March in London. Tens of thousands gathered in central London on Saturday the 16th of May for the Unite the Kingdom rally organised by Tommy Robinson. The demonstration took place on the same day as a large pro-Palestinian Nakba Day march elsewhere in central London, prompting one of the Metropolitan Police's largest public order operations in recent years. The Canary reported that Amnesty International gave 3 reasons why it considered this second march worse than the first. Robinson stopped short of formally endorsing a political party, but encouraged supporters to engage with movements across the British right, including Reform UK and other nationalist groups. I found this quite disturbing. The pro-Palestinian Nakba Day march is always held on the same day in central London to commemorate the Nakba in Palestine. And if you're not sure what the Nakba is, look it up. Look it up. It was an atrocity, and it's remembered on the same day. And Tommy Robinson's Unite the Kingdom march was specifically chosen to be put on the same day as the Nakba because he wanted to make a statement. And in making that statement, he ended up taking the place of the march for the Nakba, so forcing the Nakba to change their route, change where they were going to be marching. And he took centre stage and the police allowed it. Very disturbing, very concerning. And the very small parts that I've seen of his speech, he was inciting violence and he was inciting hatred, which when I saw parts of the Nakba march, none of the pro-Palestinian marchers were doing anything like that at all. And it just begs the question why the police would favour the Unite the Kingdom rally march over the Nakba march. But there you go. And also, if they're trying to prevent problems when it comes to protesting, why allow them both to have the march on the same day when the precedent should really have been given to the pro-Palestine march because it's commemorative? But what do I know? Point 5, National Health Service data workers revolt over Palantir's federated data platform. Yes. Good. I have seen something about this over social media. The National Health Service have actually been showing you, and you can find it. You can go onto the National Health Service database, and you can opt out of having any of your information given to a third party. And I have opted out. I'll dig out the link and I will put it in the notes so that you can choose to opt out as well. It's really important, and I'm so happy that the data workers are revolting in the National Health Service. They're not revolting, they have revolted. They're not revolting people. Open Democracy published a major piece from National Health Service workers themselves. As National Health Service data workers, they see the federated data platform's flaws up close, prompting them to launch an open letter to fight it. The story touches on growing concerns about the privatization of National Health Service data infrastructure and the role of the US defense contractor Palantir. So if you aren't aware, or you weren't aware, you obviously haven't listened to me very often. Palantir are all over our National Health Service data. They have access, they were granted access by Keir Starmer off the back of Mandelson setting up a meeting a private meeting. It wasn't recorded. There were no minutes to the meeting. And he awarded the contract to Palantir without putting it out to tender to any other data company. And Palantir are the ones that provide the United States with the coordinates and the infrastructure to be able to target people in different countries. Point 6. Reform councils banning local press. Byline Times broke the story that Reform politicians in Nottingham banned local media outlets before national outrage triggered a U-turn, and is now tracking similar patterns elsewhere. Reform UK councillors in Ipswich were reportedly told to speak only to GB News, with the local news editor saying his outlet had attempted to engage Reform candidates ahead of the elections but received nothing back, leading to pushback from Reform voters who felt the coverage was biased. Well, Reform and GB News, it does not surprise me because Nigel Farage is part of GB News. So it doesn't surprise me that he's telling them to speak only to GB News, give them the exclusives, let them do all the coverage. And we've already spoken about how biased GB News is already. If it doesn't fit their narrative, then they don't have you on the show. And if they do have you on the show and you push back against their narrative, then they will change the subject or they will talk over you. It's one of the reasons I stopped watching. So that doesn't surprise me at all, that Reform are banning local press. Point 7. Far-right anti-abortion talking points enter mainstream debate. Following abortion decriminalisation, analysis from Open Democracy and the Fuller Project reveals the UK far-right is pushing anti-abortion talking points into mainstream political debate. Published today, which is the 20th of May, the investigation maps how rhetoric previously confined to fringe spaces is now appearing in mainstream political conversation. I haven't seen very much of this, but as I said earlier, I haven't really been doing deep dives into the news streams on alternative medias because I find them quite distressing and very heavy, and it leaves me with a bad taste in my mouth. However, I have found, and I'm not sure if you're aware of this, that they have just allowed abortion up until birth. Our government has allowed abortion up until birth. I'm pro-choice. There are various reasons that you may want to terminate a pregnancy, and those reasons are belonging to the person who is pregnant and the family of that person, as far as I'm concerned. So I'm pro-choice. I would not choose personally to terminate a life, but I am not against other people choosing to do what they would like if the circumstances surrounding that are impossible. So, like I say, I'm pro-choice, but when I found out our government has legalised abortion up until birth, that I found really quite distressing. Really quite distressing. Okay, so that's it from Claude for now. And now we will approach Grok and we will ask Grok exactly the same question. Okay, so here are the top UK news stories for the past week, according to Grok. Labour's heavy losses in local elections and Starmer's leadership crisis again. So Grok is going down the same route as Claude. So obviously highlighting that even though it happened nearly 2 weeks ago now, it's still having reverberations. The May 7th, 2026 local elections saw Labour suffer major defeats, losing over 1,400 councillors and control of dozens of councils. Reform UK, led by Nigel Farage, made significant gains including over 1,400 seats in some reports, capitalising on discontent in Brexit-supporting areas, taking councils like Essex and Sunderland. Other parties like the Greens and Lib Dems also picked up seats. This is echoing exactly what he said last week. Starmer acknowledged the tough results but refused to resign, saying he would fight on. This has triggered internal Labour turmoil, with calls for him to step down and speculation about successors. That's what's been kind of going on over the last week, the speculation over successors. Independent commentary highlights a potential historic shift in British politics away from the two-party system, with Reform positioning itself as anti-establishment. I don't believe that for a second. Not for a second. They're trying to say they're anti-establishment just to get the seat. And when they get the seat, they'll bow down to the global cabal. So, yeah, what a crock of shit. Reform is not anti-establishment at all. Makerfield by-election and Andy Burnham speculation. A by-election is set for mid to late June in Makerfield? I'm not even sure where Makerfield is. Andy Burnham, Greater Manchester Mayor, so it's in Manchester, is a prominent Labour candidate being discussed as a potential future leader or challenger. Starmer has backed the candidate but faces questions about his own position. Reform UK has also selected a candidate. Ah, dear. It says discussions on X and alternative outlets frame this as a key test for Labour's direction amid voter frustration with the economy, services and immigration. I would say voter frustration is with all of the policies that Labour have put in that weren't in their manifesto, that we didn't actually put them in power. We asked, they gave us all of their pledges and we went, all right then, we'll give you a go. And as soon as we gave them the go, they got their bum in the seat, they chucked their pledges out the window and brought down this dictatorship of we say you do. That's what the people have got the ump about. Economic indicators, mixed signals on inflation, growth and cost of living. Inflation fell to 2.8 in April. GDP grew 0.6% in quarter one. And borrowing improved, presented by Chancellor Reeves as signs of Labour's fiscal approach working. I would argue it's not. Critics in independent circles point to persistent household cost pressures. Yup, just food, e.g. food. Under unemployment at 5% and high youth joblessness. Government urging supermarkets to cap prices on basics like bread, milk and eggs reflects ongoing cost of living concerns. We've talked about this a lot. I've talked about taxation. I've talked about the mismanagement of money when it comes to the budgets. And our government do not know how to manage a budget. They just don't. And like I say, the amount of tax that we have to pay on everything, it's no surprise that we are struggling. And I still say that it really, even though the illegal Iran war does have some bearing on this, we were in a dire strait anyway, and our government has not done anything really to get us out of it. Ongoing immigration and asylum debates. Migration remains a flashpoint with tracking of small boat arrivals, asylum processing, visas and hotel use. Reform and critics highlight it as a core voter issue driving shifts away from Labour. There are reports of new legislation on asylum reforms and efforts to speed up deportation of serious criminals. I would argue that we need to have something in place that if we can identify serious criminals, we don't allow them in the country in the first place, rather than letting them come in the country, then identifying them and trying to get them out. It's arse backwards. It is really arse about face. It doesn't make any sense to me. It really, really doesn't. And genuine asylum seekers from countries that we are complicit in the wars that are going on in their countries, they, I think, should be looked at as slightly different to people that just arrive in our country because they want to live here from a country that isn't particularly experiencing any problems, issues, or hardships. And then we may not have to try and find and deport serious criminals. Other notable mentions, according to Grok, the HS2 project costs ballooning up to 102.7 billion. The HS2, if you remember, was the railway that was going to be connecting the west of the country, and it got shelved. And it's been shelved now until 2036. But the costs 102.7 billion. Ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. Border patrolling, we're not in America. Broader polling shows Reform UK performing strongly nationally with ongoing leadership ratings questions for Starmer. Well, yeah, like I say, Reform did take over quite a few seats, so they are going quite strong at the moment. But we all know that even if they get in, it won't make a difference. Alternative outlets discuss societal tensions, including debates around policing, identity, and public trust in institutions. Yeah, if it's any mainstream institution, we don't have, as a public, we don't generally have much trust in them. If it's a governmental institution, we don't have any trust in them at all. And when it comes to identity and policing, we don't have trust because they're giving our information away to other companies, private companies, and that's just not on. So again, this week, just like the last few weeks, it's all been very, very political, as you would expect when it comes to local elections and things like that. Nothing, again, that I would look at from a health and well-being point of view. I would say that the overall general feel of people on the street, Joe Schmo, you and me, public, is that we're being gaslit by our government. Our children are disillusioned when they're coming out and they're going into, making decisions about going to college or maybe going to university. Their very first question is, well, what kind of job will I be able to get at the end of it? Because we know that with the advent of AI and the movement forward with technology, that people generally are not being used for, or won't be used for, jobs that a computer can do, that AI can do better, more efficiently and quicker. So a lot of students are feeling very disillusioned when it comes to their future. And if we're looking at the health and well-being sense of a population, I would suggest that we are actually in a bit of a health and well-being crisis, because we have a sense of apathy in our country. There's a sense that it doesn't matter what you do, nothing can ever change. And people are sick. And I'm not saying physically sick. People are mentally sick. People are emotionally sick. People are psychologically sick and tired of what is happening in this country. So I may well do a research hub on our emotional, psychological, and mental sickness as a population in the UK, because I think it's something that we really need to keep an eye on. And if you're experiencing that, my suggestion to you is come away from social media like I've been doing. Come away from the political arena and do something that brings you joy, whatever it is, even if it's just something very, very small. Every day, do something that brings you joy, and let's battle this problem together. But for now, that is the news for this week.